Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to join us today for this Climate and Environment Hustings, hosted by Friends of the Earth, the DCU Centre for Climate and Society, and the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition. I'm Oisin Coughlin, the Chief Executive of Friends of the Earth, and I'm going to speak to you just for a few minutes to set the scene for what we're about to see. What we really want to hear from is the parties, or as I put it in a press release in the last 24 hours, parties being grilled about global boiling. That's what we plan to hear today. But just a little bit of context first. I hover at the moment between hope and dread. Over the last 5-6 years, since the Citizens' Assembly, since the school strikes, since the campaigning that Stop Climate Chaos and Friends of the Earth did for years around the climate law, we have seen some progress. The Citizens' Assembly results itself, the results of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate, a new cross-party consensus for action. And then, of course, during the course of this last Dáil, the 33rd Dáil, the 7 parties represented to my right passed the Climate Act in 2021 by 129 votes to 10. And all 7 parties represented also adopted the binding emissions ceilings, the binding limits on pollution to 2025 and 2030 that were put before the Dáil on the advice of the Climate Change Advisory Council. So there's now expert advice, there's now parliamentary binding emissions, there is parliamentary scrutiny, there are climate action plans, and we are seeing emissions begin to fall, 2% in 2022 and 7% in 2023. But it's not fast enough, as we all know. The EPA projects for the last 2 years running that we'll only get 29% down by 2030. That's better than it would have been, but the target in the climate law is 51%. It's not fair enough. We in Friends of the Earth and our allies across civil society in the Stop Climate Chaos Coalition realise more and more that climate actions must also address the everyday material concerns of the public, especially those struggling with the cost of living crisis. And we know that climate solutions exist that reduce poverty and inequality and make life better for everyone, not just the wealthy. But that's not always the way climate action is presented or perceived or indeed performed. So that's a crucial aspect of this. We need to see more done to see both faster and fairer climate action. But the third challenge is that the progress is fragile. Too many state agencies are still dragging their heels, are pursuing their own agendas, which sometimes look more like vested interests than like public interest, albeit that they're subject to the climate law. Their own mandates still have potentially contradictory impulses, shall we say. There are parts of the state system that still feel like that. There are some politicians who are sowing disinformation and misinformation for the purposes of division and short-term political advantage. And there is the perception that the public is resistant to action. Now, we know there's all sorts of psychological findings around loss aversion and short-term inconvenience versus long-term gain. And there's also, I think, a risk of confusion between the signal and the noise. 5 years ago, the noise was Greta Thunberg, school strikes, Extinction Rebellion, and politicians paid close attention and wanted to be seen to be addressing the issue. We all know, without me rehearsing the issues, that that's not what the noise is this time. But the underlying signal is stronger than ever, that the Irish public supports climate action and is worried about climate change. We have done ongoing polling with Ireland Thinks over the last year, and the vast majority of the public regard climate as a serious risk. And the 2 most interesting findings in polling we did in October that are worth just briefly saying here. One is that of the 5 or 6 issues that Ireland Thinks have found the public ranked most consistently important over the last 5 years, so crime, immigration, cost of living, healthcare, housing, climate's the one where the public thinks this government has made most progress. Not necessarily enough progress, but most progress. But also, they think that it hasn't done enough. 40% think we're not moving fast enough, and we are not doing enough. 37% think we're doing enough as fast as practical, but only 11% think we're doing too much too fast. And what's really, really interesting about those numbers is that of the 7 parties to my right, there's cross-party support for that. So, for example, in debates you hear, are some parties, voters, do they need to be assuaged that climate action won't be too fast? A third of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael voters say we're not doing enough fast enough. a majority, a separate majority, think we're doing enough as fast as practical. Only 10% think that we're going too fast. And across the parties, their voters want to see more action of the parties represented to my right here. Some parties who didn't accept the invitation and some independents, their voters feel differently for sure to get those overall numbers. So in summary though, it's not fast enough, it's not fair enough, and it's fragile. And so seeing as these parties to my right passed the climate law and are committed, we presume, to upholding that law and to pursuing the actions required to meet the limits that they set in the Dáil, we're really looking forward to hearing the detail from them today about how they do that and how they make it fair. Because, look, we all know that climate action can be challenging and some people may fear it. But what we know for sure is that climate inaction is a price we'll all pay. And we sometimes hear from politicians that it's not coming up in the doorsteps the way it was 4 years ago. Well, I don't know if it was coming up in the doorsteps last year in the Spanish election, but it's on the doorsteps in Valencia and Malaga now, and we know it's on all our doorsteps. The very first climate campaign I ran in Friends of the Earth had a picture of Bertie Ahern in the floods out in the Talca River, I think it was, and with the slogan that we put on it, "Don't wait until climate change hits home." Well, it's here, it's coming, but we still have a choice as to how bad it gets and as to who suffers most, and how we work together to make sure that we have a relatively safe climate future with a better quality of life for all. So, without further ado, I will now hand you over to Pat Leahy, the political editor of the Irish Times, who has agreed to discuss the future of climate action with the 7 parties represented. Thanks very much.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks to Friends of the Earth for the invitation to be here with you this morning. I'm delighted to be here to ask some questions and also to listen to the answers. This feels to me like a consequential election, even if the campaign hasn't been the fizziest we have ever seen so far. I think this election will be an important one. Elections like 1977, 1987, 1997 and 2011 were important because they set the direction of travel at a time of great change and consequential change in Ireland. And this feels to me like it could be one of those elections, a sort of a hinge election that has an importance far beyond the next 5 years. The next government, we know, given its economic good fortune, will have great opportunities to deal with some of the most pressing social problems. But there are great uncertainties too, and it is likely to be presented with great challenge. Not just the challenge on climate, but on housing, healthcare, cost of living, immigration, security, law and order, a whole host of things. It's inevitable that they will have to deal with those challenges over the next 5 years, and they may have to deal with those challenges with drastically reduced financial firepower if what some of us fear is coming out of the United States does turn out to be the case, in which case those challenges will become all the more difficult. The campaign so far has, I think everybody would agree, has almost failed to ignite. We've seen lots of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael sniping. I'm not sure how real any of it is. We've seen Sinn Féin perhaps consolidating, but will it make the gains that would make government a real possibility? The smaller parties and independents have been trying to elbow their way in. Can they, in the last 10 days of the campaign, can they elbow their way in to such an extent that it makes a change of government a real possibility, or will one of them settle to be the third leg of the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael stool? There's lots of debates and the decisive second half of the campaign to come. We know from exit polls that half of all voters, at least the last time, made up their minds how to vote in the last over the course of campaign, and of them, a large proportion made up their minds in the last week. So this election, I think, is yet there to be won and lost. As many of you will have seen on Monday night, 10 participants is perhaps too many for a debate.
That's true.
7's about right, I find. So I'm delighted that we have that number today. The participants need no introduction, but for the sake of the record, Hildegarde Naughton is here from Fianna Gael, Thomas Byrne from Fianna Fáil, Darren O'Rourke from Sinn Féin, Pippa Hackett from the Greens, Paul Murphy from Solidarity People Before Profit, Jennifer Whitmore from the Social Democrats, and Ivana Bacik from the Labour Party. And I will put you on notice now that Ivana has to leave to do a leaders interview with, I think, RTE, and with Pat Kenny. So when she leaves sometime between 10 and half 10, she is not storming off in anger. We're particularly grateful for Hildegarde and Pippa to come because they're missing the cabinet meeting which is taking place at the moment. Though I heard from RTE that it is the last cabinet meeting, I'm afraid it's not. There will be several more cabinet meetings. The format of this morning's debate is that all of the candidates will be given a strict 2 minutes to lay out their stall. Then we'll get into some questions for perhaps 40, 45 minutes, and then we will turn over the last half an hour, 20 minutes to you in the audience. So if you have questions, have them ready for them. For then we will have roaming mics. To the candidates, I will ask you to debate with one another, but kindly do so through me. Don't talk over one another, wave at me, and I will get you in. So without further ado, I will call on Ivana to give us your 2-minute opening spiel.
Thanks, Pat. This was originally envisaged, I think, as a grilling of party leaders. I think I'm the only party leader here and obviously participated in the grilling of 10 on Monday night. So I'm delighted to be here. It is a mark of the seriousness with which we in the Labour Party take the existential crisis that is the climate and biodiversity emergency. We're the party of work, the party of the trade union movement, and we believe in ambitious and urgent action to achieve a just transition on climate change. We launched our climate manifesto yesterday. In it, we put forward strong, ambitious policies, including funding a national retrofitting revolution to ensure that we support households in bringing about not just emissions reductions, but reductions in energy costs. We put forward our proposal for a €9 climate ticket, unlimited transport, unlimited journeys on public transport across the country for €9 per month. Again, the aim of reducing household costs, ensuring a just transition, and crucially, reducing reliance on private transport. And we're talking about ensuring that the state can take an equity share in the development of offshore wind. That's the sort of ambitious, urgent action that's needed to ensure we do not fall short of meeting our crucial climate targets. We want to make sure that energy, that ambition is channeled into delivering on the opportunities that lie with the green revolution. As we see Trump elected and coming in the US, we know the threat. We know his presidency is likely to set back the urgent action necessary on climate change. So we in Ireland must do more. We must be more ambitious, more urgent in our approach to tackling climate. And our Labour policies seek to do that through harnessing the power of the state, the active state, to deliver climate action.
Thanks, Ivana. Darren.
Thanks. Thanks very much. And very happy to be here. I think, it's really important to say that the science demands action. The science is and must be agreed, and the question then is how we deliver on the essential emissions reductions targets. And I think, hopefully that's where this debate will be. There are some in the Dáil who might argue the first point. For Sinn Féin, it's a matter of insisting that the transition is just and fair. There is spectacular opportunity in the energy transition for the island of Ireland, and Sinn Féin has set out a suite of proposals to ensure that we realise that potential and that the state and communities and householders play an active part and benefit from that transition as well. We need massive investment in public transport. We need heavy and light rail to form the backbone of our public transport network, and expansion of bus services that are affordable, reliable, safe and accessible, including for people with disabilities. That's low-hanging fruit. There's a huge demand for those services, and they are time and time again availed of in excess of what the modelling shows from the transport authorities. We need to invest in a fair way. So Sinn Féin has set out a fundamental reform of the retrofitting plan to ensure that those who are most in need get the most support, that we deliver the emissions reductions targets, but we do it in a fair way, and that we roll out our massive state investment in retrofitting in a fair way that ensures that it's efficiently done using an area-based approach, but ultimately that we deliver the emissions reductions targets in a fair way. We also need to look at how we use our land and seas and waterways in Ireland to ensure that the future of farming is in line with our climate obligations, that farmers are supported in a just transition, that the nature of farming and land use trade transforms in Ireland, again, in a just and fair way. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Darren and Pippa.
Thanks, Pat, and it's great to be here in this wonderfully historic room talking about the future and where Ireland is going and how we can continue to lead out on climate action. I think the Green Party is the only party that has, for its whole over 40 years, put the environment, nature, climate action and social justice at the core of all its decision-making and policy-making perspectives and views, and that has driven where we are today. Unfortunately, we were ignored for far too long, and we've seen how far behind we are some of our European counterparts, but the dial is turning, and that's because the Greens have been in government for the past 4.5 years. Albeit maybe slower than many would like, the dial is moving, and I think that is clear to see. I think it's really about the system changes that need to happen across the economy, and we are seeing it, and we are doing that in a way that deals with the challenges people have every day. So we are reducing the cost of retrofitting. I would argue we already have a solar revolution in Ireland. We are driving on with delivering of renewable energy projects. We are transforming agriculture. We're transforming how agriculture is done by reducing climate-emitting inputs. And we are decarbonising, and we have plans to decarbonise the construction sector, a sector that actually doesn't get much attention, and be interested to hear if we debate it today. So that system change is happening. It takes time on the ground, and coming from the Midlands of Ireland and being a farmer, I know firsthand how challenging some of those system changes are to implement. But we can do it. We're seeing it happen. We build on what's working. We amend what isn't working, or we change it, and we keep driving on, because this is a matter for our own futures, the world's futures. People around the world are watching what we are doing, as they do so often. And Ireland can lead out on this. And I'm looking forward to the debate today. It will inform us all as we move forward. So thank you.
Thanks, Pippa. Hildegarde, please.
Thank you, Pat, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. I think this is a really important debate in this upcoming general election for us all to set out our vision around how we're going to tackle climate change and what every party is offering. Just in relation to Fine Gael, we have been absolutely committed and will continue to be committed to addressing climate action. We were the party in 2015 who introduced Ireland's first Climate Act. We banned fracking in 2017. Fine Gael banned offshore oil exploration in 2019. I chaired the all-party committee, and a number of people actually on this panel sat on that committee, and that resulted in an action plan for Ireland, and that was to bring all parties together, because rather than having us all making, I suppose, the climate action a political debate, which I know it can become sometimes, and rightly so, because it's not easy to change, it's not easy to reduce emissions, it's trying to bring people with us. So Fine Gael under Richard Bruton was instrumental in that, and I had the honour of chairing that all-party Oireachtas committee. this past government, we have, I think, made huge progress in relation to reducing emissions. We saw last year emissions reduced by almost 7%, but absolutely we need to do more. What Fine Gael want to do, if we are back in government, is set up a new Department of Infrastructure that will be engineer heavy, have the designers, the expertise in one department to address the issues around water, infrastructure, expanding the national grid, all those big infrastructure projects to make sure that they are delivered on time and more efficiently. We also need to continue, and Fine Gael is very strong in relation to this. Yes, we need to set ambitious targets, but we have to bring people with us. And there's a lot of fear around how we're going to achieve that. So the different sectors, for example, farming, not pointing the finger at them, but acknowledging those that have done well. And we have seen emissions reduced in the agriculture sector. And there are many farmers who are doing this really well, who have very good farming practices, but there are others who are struggling and we need to support them.
Thanks, Hildegarde and Paul.
Like that. The first thing is we need to tell the truth to people. The truth is we're not leading on climate. The truth is everything isn't going to be okay. We're not going to get there. The truth is we're heading for absolute catastrophe and we're going to miss by a country mile our legally binding targets, which are in themselves inadequate. That's the truth. It's a truth that is replicated right across the globe. People should read the article in the Irish Times today about the potential collapse of the AMOC. This is something that the IPCC said could happen, but quite a long way away, whereas it could happen soon. It would massively disrupt agriculture in this country, our way of life. The whole world is warming except for one part of the North Atlantic because the AMOC is slowing down. That's the central heating system for the world. We're heading for absolute catastrophe. Why? It's not because we don't have the knowledge. It's not because we don't have the science. It's because of vested interests. It's because we have a government that refuses to stand up to big agribusiness, that refuses to stand up to big tech, that goes along with more fossil fuel infrastructure. It's epitomised by a climate criminal, Michael O'Leary, addressing a Fine Gael launch to guffaws while he attacks low carbon impact workers of teachers. That's the truth. We need a radical change of direction, which means taking on those vested interests, standing up to big tech, no more data centres, a radical change of our agricultural model, improving the lives of small farmers, but radically reducing the size of our herd and improving people's lives. Free retrofitting, free public transport, massively expanded, improving people's lives, enabling them to use less energy. That's what we need to do. People will buy in to that. There isn't a problem with getting public buy-in as long as you're actually improving people's lives.
Thanks, Paul. Thomas.
Thanks very much, Pat, and thanks for having us this morning. From Fianna Fáil's point of view, as Micheál Martin has said on numerous occasions, this is an existential threat to the world, to our existence. We get that. In opposition and since in government, we have acted on that. The Climate Act was something that the government brought forward. Micheál Martin was Taoiseach, and we supported it enthusiastically. And the Irish public supports it enthusiastically. I think there are many things that we can do that are a practical benefit to people that deal with that existential threat and that work for people and work for the country. We talked about retrofitting homes. We talk about changing our energy policy, our energy mix coming into the country, which has started to happen massively as well. But that's also could be and can be and will be a bedrock of our industrial economic policy over the next number of years as well, in terms of bringing wealth into the country through particularly the production of alternative sources of energy, which are really, really essential. But I was really glad to hear Oisín speak about working with people. I think, as Micheál said the other night on TV, there has been an element, not Oisín, but there has been an element of some people talking down, and we've seen that from some politicians, talking down to the public, particularly farmers. Farmers and the general public in general are very enthusiastic about what you have to do once you work with them and are not seen to talk down to them. Yesterday, I met a group of anglers. And there are some people within the environmental movement who would ban angling, but these people were the most concerned people I ever met about water quality, about biodiversity protection, and we've got to work with all sectors of society to make sure that we do that. But it is a global threat. It is a global threat that Ireland must act on its own unilaterally, but of course with our European colleagues and at a UN level as well. And Fianna Fáil is absolutely determined to do that.
Thanks, Thomas. And finally, Jennifer.
Thank you very much, Pat, and thank you for having me here today. As someone who has worked and studied in this sector since I was 17, so that's a long time now, I suppose I oscillate too between feeling really frustrated and depressed about what we're seeing, but also we have seen a bit of movement in the last number of years. So there are positives that we are seeing. I mean, 20 years ago, I worked in the New South Wales government in what was then called the Greenhouse Office, where we dealt with climate mitigation adaptation measures as well. And I suppose we're so far behind where we need to be, but we are seeing progress. And I suppose it's about building on that progress and building on it in a way where we bring everybody along. Now, I am very proud that the Social Democrats pushed really hard in the last term for a very strong climate act, an act with teeth. But I suppose setting the targets and putting the act in place is only the first step. And actually, in retrospect, it was probably the easiest step, because now it's delivering on all those measures where we're seeing the difficulty. We're not seeing, the last government did not deliver sufficiently on the measures that we need in order to meet our 51%. The Climate Action Plan, which is the very pathway and plan that the government put in place in order to meet our targets, wasn't sufficient. It was only going to meet 29% of the 51% reduction, and that was if everything was 100% completed on time and in full. And we know, from history that sometimes we have a difficulty in delivering things in full. So I think, we do need to deliver better and quicker, but I also think we do need to be honest. And my greatest fear is that people out there think that we're doing well when it comes to climate, and really we're not. And I think we do need to get that message that we do need to make quicker and faster change. I think we need to sell the message that if you do this properly, that actually it will result in a much better way of living for everybody. Warmer homes, public transport when they need it, an agricultural system that is robust and food secure and actually works for farmers, because we haven't seen that to date. So it's about working with people, but being honest with them as well, and not siloing the environment from every other issue we see. The reason it's not on the doors at the moment is because housing and cost of living is the major problems. But we're not going to be able to deal with the environment if we don't deal with things like housing and those social issues as well. So it's bringing all those together and working with them as one.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. So there's obviously a high degree of agreement on the need for climate action, and that won't surprise anybody here. But I think what we would need to try and get to this morning is to see how much of a priority it is for all of you if you were to play a part in the next government. And what we would like to do is get firm commitments from you about action in government. And for those of you who might be negotiating with larger parties, how much of a red line you would make specific issues this morning. So, Ivana, I'm going to start with you, because I was going to say you're not long for this world, but you're it's not. That's not what I mean. I'll start with you because you've got to go. So you supported the climate law, and the emissions limits are in law, but the EPA says we're not on track to meet them. So what new policies or measures would you take in government, and would you insist on those, or which ones would you insist in if you're negotiating a programme for government?
Well, climate action would be an absolute priority for us in Labour. It's something we set out very clearly in our manifesto back in 2006, before I was elected to the Oireachtas. I was involved as a founding member of Friends of the Earth Ireland, and indeed in 2007, when I was elected to the Seanad, brought forward the first bill to set binding climate emission reduction targets. So we have been very committed to this for a long, long time. We've set out in the manifesto a clear set of policies for and a programme for achieving the necessary reduction. As you said, Pat, the EPA are saying we're only on track to achieve a 29% reduction by 2030. That's way short of the 50% minimal target.
So what gets you there?
So what gets us there? That retrofitting revolution is crucial, because that's how we bring people with us. The just transition to ensure people see a reduction in their energy bills. What that will take is the sort of ground level work that we've proposed with our community level environment advisors, who will be able to advise not just individual households who want to make a change to, for example, solar, but street by street, area by area retrofitting. So we're talking about a 2.5 billion national retrofitting fund. We're talking about ensuring that we have targets of 50,000 deep retrofit and refurbishment of homes every year.
You want to build 50,000 homes as well.
New
Are you
homes.
happy that the capacity is there to do those two things at the one time? I mean, this is what I mean about priorities, because people will always also say housing is a priority. So, you know,
but that's how it works, Pat. We have to set housing as a priority, and within that, and we were the first party to set out that level of ambition. Yes, 1 million homes in a decade sounds highly ambitious, but let's break it down. It's 50,000 new builds per year. The Housing Commission and the government parties now accept that's the minimum ambition we need for new houses. How do we build those? We transform the Land Development Agency into a state construction company. We're the only party that set out with clarity how you do that. You ramp up capacity in the Land Development Agency, and that allows the building of new homes at scale. It allows the deployment of modern methods of construction, of timber frame housing, housing that is going to deliver in a far more climate-friendly way. That's the new builds. The other part of the piece is the retrofit and refurbishment of vacant and derelict homes. And we all know across the country the scourge of vacancy and dereliction and the lack of capacity there in current laws and policies to tackle that. We need to improve CPO powers for local authorities, and we need to ensure that we put state investment, and again this comes back to Labour as a centre-left, green-red party, looking at how we invest state money, how we leverage state capacity and state resources to deliver that retrofitting revolution that also delivers on housing, on the homes that people need. And yes, housing is the biggest issue coming up on every constituency and every canvas that all of us are doing. But we have to harness the power of the state to deliver not only on homes, but also on climate. And we can do that through that retrofitting revolution we've spoken about. So that is a key priority for us in Labour. Absolutely, Pat, in any programme for government negotiations. But I've said we do that best through a common platform on the left and on the Green movement to bring parties together that have common vision and common values.
Yeah, Darren, I'll come to you in a second, but just on that latter point, Pippa, about a common platform for the centre-left parties, centre-left, red-green parties, if I can call them that. Do you think that's a way of getting these sort of things into a programme for government?
I think it's worth thinking about, but to be honest, I feel that the Green Party, because it has that fundamental, we're talking about climate action here, we're talking about environmentalism. We are the only party that has that at our core and has always had that at our core. Now, it is welcome to hear Ivana talking about, you know, vacant and derelict sites and bringing them into use. And that's been a Green Party mantra for decades, you know. It's welcome to hear supports for, you know, far more climate action, whether it's within the housing sector and the use of timber. Again, we've led out on that in government. I established in my own department across government a timber and working group. You know, the construction sector never really gets called out. It's one of the highest emitting sectors, you know, between concrete, cement, lorries on the road, moving cement and steel around the country.
But that's not going to change if we have to build 50,000
well,
houses a year.
Well, it will, because if we focus on that, and if we're in government, we will be making a big focus to deliver on more modern methods of construction. As Ivana said, more timber in construction. We grow lots of trees in this country. We have to grow far more. But if we can service our own needs in the construction, every other country in Europe does this quite readily. It can use cross-laminated timber to build multi-storey apartment blocks. We're really bad at that. So we continue to drive on with cement and steel in our construction sector. We'll always need some of it. But if we can displace a lot above ground with timber, we are decarbonising our sector, and we will be taking thousands and thousands of lorries off the road every year because it's off-site construction. It actually decarbonises the economy across the board. And if we can support that by planting more trees, which we need to do, it's win-win.
Are you worried that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael's enthusiasm for climate action is waning?
Me?
Yes, you.
No. In a simple answer, yes. I mean, we know because we negotiated to go into government. I mean, our red line was that we had to meet the reduction targets of 51%, and I accept that we're not on target for that, but we have made a significant start on that road. That was our red line issue, and it was a challenge to get that initial agreement before we could to engage in talks, but we did, and we were grateful for that, and it helped us establish, and we put in place the climate laws now that keep our country on track. But yes, I am. I mean, I think some of the narratives around, I mean, you talk about the 2-to-1 spend we put in place as well in terms of public transport and roads. I very much fear that would be completely sidelined if the Greens are not in government the next time, because everywhere I go, there's a demand for a new road. And look, we're not anti-road. We want to maintain roads. We want to put bypasses around towns and make our towns and cities, our towns, more livable. But we're not going to decarbonise the transport sector unless we completely keep ramping up the public transport and giving those options to people across the country.
We'll come to transport in a bit, and I want to come to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael to respond to that. But firstly, Darren, let me bring you back to the original question to Ivana about specific priorities and specific measures that would achieve the 50% by 2030.
Yeah, I suppose to start by saying climate and climate action are a major priority for Sinn Féin, reflected in our annual alternative budgets and in our manifesto, which was published yesterday. Mary Lou MacDonald was asked the manifesto launch, put the opportunity for energy security and independence on a par with Irish unity in terms of the potential for this country, for this island. I think if anybody knows anything about Sinn Féin, we're pretty fond of Irish unity. So to put energy security and independence there, and I think that actually is for me, that is the foundation on which the emissions reductions will be delivered. I think there's a real parallel there to our industrial and economic future. I think there needs to be, Jennifer's point of we need to think in terms of the social transformation of Ireland, the economic transformation of Ireland, and the environmental transformation of Ireland. And in the energy transition, those three things align perfectly well in my position, in my opinion. And what does that look like? So it looks like setting targets, but also meeting targets. So we haven't been connecting enough renewables to the grid in the last 12 months, 24 months, for the last number of years. We need to address the roadblocks in relation to that, in terms of planning, in terms of the different bits that go with that. But also, we need to set out a clear vision in terms of the role of the state itself being a key player in the energy transition, the role of communities, in terms of the role of communities in taking their part, and domestic. And domestic is largely in relation to solar PV. But, for example, what Sinn Féin would do is invest 2.5 billion euros in a renewable investment fund to ensure that the likes of ESB, Byrne, Coillte are empowered to be key players in the energy transition. For example, our offshore renewables, we had our first auction. There wasn't an Irish winner in relation to it. We don't know whether they'll be successful in later auctions. So what Sinn Féin would do was set a target that there would be a majority state, community and domestic ownership of the Irish energy infrastructure, and that the state and its communities would benefit from the dividend of that. So, and we also think that, building an economy on clean, green energy will have a real currency into the future, regardless of what happens in the White House or anywhere else.
Yeah. Let me just ask you one very quick question directed at you alone. If you had 10 billion euros to spend and you could spend it on Irish unity or on climate action, which would you spend it on?
Well, you see,
don't tell me both.
I'm going to say in this, I see the delivery of Irish unity and the transformation of the Irish economy. Because for Sinn Féin, it's always been the thing of we don't want a united 26 counties. We want the transformation of the island in terms of the economy. And the difficulty we have here, the problem with the reason we're in the place where we are, is because we've built up a consumption capitalist economy that we need to move away from. We need to build a different type of economy. And I think actually a real pitch for Irish unity is that type of vision for a different type of Ireland.
I'll come to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in a minute. Do you want to come in just before you go?
Just very briefly, because whenever I listen to Sinn Féin talk about climate, and I raised this the other night at the leaders' debate, I find it hard to take them any party seriously on climate action if they're not in favour of carbon tax. I mean, carbon tax is the means through which we ensure funding for that just transition, for that retrofitting, for that building up of
not the only
capacity.
way.
Well,
It's not the
but
only-
it's a crucial way,
we've
Darren,
set
and it
out
is
an
hard.
No,
to
Darren,
take
just let her
to-
speak. Yeah.
No, I mean, just to finish that point, for Labour, we've always stood, very seriously behind the need for funding to ensure that we have sufficient funding in place to secure that just transition and deliver on the reduction targets on 51% by 2030. How are we going to do that if we're taking away, abolishing a key metric, a key means to do that, instead of saying it should be ring-fenced?
Very briefly, Darren.
So that's a question. No, and I don't think it needs to be very briefly, because it needs to be the base of this. The charge is that there is no alternative to delivering climate action than carbon tax. But we have literally set it out in black and white in our manifesto. So, for example, the super excess profits of energy companies that this government left 500 million euros on the table. Sinn Féin and others in the opposition set out that we should have gone further in relation to that. 500 million euros would retrofit a lot of homes. Taxes on wealth, for example, would be raised and spent on climate action measures. Solidarity taxes.
Okay, Darren,
taxes on the types of...
Is it not the case, though, Darren,
just 1 second. It's fossil fuel subsidies that are massively supporting the fossil fuel industry. Those should be tackled, and they should be invested in climate action. So
is it not the case that you're against the carbon tax, not because you figured out some other brilliant way of achieving it, but because the carbon tax is unpopular?
No, well, it is unpopular for a reason. Why is it unpopular?
You've got to have to do unpopular things, right?
It's unpopular because it's brutally unjust and it's unfair, and actually it's not been used for, in an awful lot of the case, for climate action measures. Okay. So to finish on it, it's only the increases since 2020 that are ring-fenced, and 40% of those are unaccounted for. So don't tell me that carbon tax is the only way to deliver climate action. I actually think it's a distraction in this debate. We need a fair funding mechanism that delivers real climate action, and that's my position.
That's what carbon tax.
Paul, briefly.
Well, look, I think Sinn Féin is weak on climate. They're weak particularly because they won't touch agriculture, which is the biggest emitting sector. But I don't think they're weak because they're opposed to carbon tax. I really think this is a red herring. In America, do you know who lobbies in favour of carbon taxes? Fossil fuel corporations. Why? Because they want to divert people away from a radical Green New Deal proposal. It really is a red herring to pretend that we're going to have a market-based solution and don't worry. And there's lots of studies to say that, okay, you have some impact, but it's extremely slow. And I would really strongly argue that what you gain in terms of your small, minimal impact, you more than lose on the other end in terms of public buy-in. So what you actually need to see, like I actually met a guy last night and he was like, the environmental measures, we need to do it, but it's too hard and it's too fast. And I was like, do you really think it's too fast? And this guy had his home retrofitted, actually, And I was like, do you not think we need to be doing these sort of things faster? I mean, you put it like that, he was like, oh, yes. But the point is to go after. Do you know what the best measures to cut pollution is? Tax the rich. It is the rich who pollute the most, both individually in terms of consumption and in terms of their control of the means of production. We should not be having private jets flying into this country. A 10-hour private jet flight emits as much carbon as an average person in this country does in an entire year. And it is correct that people see that as incredibly unjust, that these people at the rich can continue, the people at the top can continue to pollute, and whereas I find my life's getting harder. Ordinary people's lives need to get better.
Is that not just saying other people can do the heavy lifting?
It's saying that those who are responsible for pollution, which is those at the top, should do the heavy lifting. See, in this idea, like this is a feature of your columns, right? And the Irish Times kind of line is like, we need to make the hard choices. You need to be serious about... For me, the hard choices that are never made in this country is choices that take on the vested interests at the top. Not one other party, not one, has a commitment in their manifesto to have no more investment in fossil fuel infrastructure. None. So the Labour Party says you can't take Sinn Féin seriously because they're relying on carbon tax. The Labour Party does not commit to no more LNG infrastructure. They have the same...
We do.
No, you don't.
Read our manifesto.
I will. Okay.
Read it. It's right here.
I'll read it out for you right now. One second.
Are you still here?
The Labour Party said, we will seek to end all further investment in fossil fuel infrastructure, such as gas pipelines, gas, including liquefied gas storage infrastructure, or fossil fuel power generation installations, except for that which is required to balance the grid in the short term. It's the same weasel words.
Okay.
It's the same weasel words of the Green Party, which represent a betrayal of the environmental movement. It is madness.
Okay,
to invest
thanks,
in
Paul.
fossil
No,
fuel
Ivana,
infrastructure
3 people who haven't
at
got
the
in
time
at
of
all
this
yet.
catastrophe.
Yeah,
So,
but Pat, I do have to leave.
Very
I
brief.
just want to address a couple of quick points.
No, not a
One
couple
is-
of quick points,
well,
one quick point.
Those who want to see, who genuinely want to see left to centre and green policies delivered, I think need to ensure that there's some sort of solidarity, some sort of practical pathway to achieving that actual impact for policies and implementation of policies. Of course, we're in favour of absolutely banning LNG. We put forward amendments to the planning bill on that. And can I just say this very finally? It is hard to take parties seriously on climate if they don't vote for the nature restoration law at EU level, because climate is too big and too serious a challenge for any one country to deal with alone or any one party to take as its preserves. We all have to campaign together on this, and at EU level as much as at domestic level. And I do have to leave now, but I'm not storming out. Genuinely.
I think Paul Murphy is
I've
right.
got to get 3 speakers in or they'll storm out. Come on.
Paul Murphy is right. We do have to take hard decisions, but the hardest decision of all is to go into government to do some of this. And like Labour the last time said, no, you're grand, we won't. Social Democrats, no, you're grand, we won't.
It's called the numbers.
We couldn't
The
do a deal
numbers didn't add
with
up,
people
and
before
let's face
profit, and we
it,
couldn't do a deal with Sinn Féin. So that's the hardest decision of all. So I'm glad we're in the Academy today, because a lot of this debate is academic. Fianna Fáil is here to actually implement really serious targets on this climate front. And to answer the question about Sinn Féin, whether they prioritise climate or environment, to be fair to them, they've only 8 million in their manifesto for what they call unity, and we heard the billions there for climate, so they certainly take climate more seriously than unity. But these are big decisions that we have to take, and it requires parties to go into government to take them, to lead on this, to take the difficult decisions.
Okay,
and they all come in.
Specific decisions will you take to bring down emissions at a greater rate in the second half?
And just if you look back at the Dáil record on any of the votes on climate, many of them were really, really controversial, with Sinn Féin regularly putting up those photographs of the votes in the Dáil, particularly on the carbon tax. The carbon tax is one of the most socially just measures that has ever been invented. Because why? Because it is a taxation on usage, and it goes back into primarily and putting money into retrofits, putting money into other environmental measures, which basically help poorer people, and fuel allowance is another one of the beneficiaries as well, helps poorer people deal with the climate crisis. So if we want to be socially just, if we want to be left of centre, as so many parties in Ireland, and Pat has unfortunately given them some credit for that, we actually have to implement these measures and do what's right rather than what looks good on an Oireachtas vote. And I think Fianna Fáil is prepared to do that. We're prepared to go into government, and that means more retrofits. It means really ramping up and changing our industrial strategy to get more of that offshore wind into the country and be really, really serious about it, not then nitpicking at every particular project. And I agree with Pippa as well in terms of construction. And there are companies out there, and I've met some of them, who are involved seriously now in lower carbon cement, for example. That's one of them. But again, every time somebody wants to put forward one of these proposals or build a facility that deals with some of these lower carbon items, we see objections from right across the political spectrum.
Okay, Hildegarde.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important when we're talking about the future here, what is the vision for Ireland? We have to look at even taking climate out of it. Just for a second, I know it's a climate debate, but if we talk about Ireland's future in the world and job creation, like this is where it's at. It's offshore renewable energy, it's renewables. You all know probably in this room that 40% of our electricity is generated currently from renewable energy. This is the space we need to be in, and that's why it's really important that we move faster. And part of I suppose the challenge is around the infrastructure part, the efficiency around that, and that's why this Department of Infrastructure will be really important. In relation to connectivity and transport, we in Fine Gael believe in connectivity right throughout the island and off the island. So that includes our roads, it includes public transport, rail, walking, cycling, active travel. When I was Minister in the Department of Transport, I initiated the Safe Routes to School programme. It's about quality of life as well, enabling communities. And this is where you can set a target, which is great, but how do you help communities to actually not buy in, but see the benefit of this? So if it's offshore renewable or onshore renewable or solar energy. Local communities need to be able to benefit from that through jobs, whether it's offshore renewable energy, where local coastal communities can service these turbines going in and out off the shore, offshore remote monitoring, investing in our ports. Yes, in our airports, we are an island nation.
Okay, Hildegarde, but this is kind of wish listy stuff. You know, what we're interested in is, I guess, what specifically would you? I mean, you would accept if you're in government, Fine Gael are in government next time, they will have to, if they're going to meet those 2030 targets, they have to accelerate climate action. Yeah. So what are we talking about here?
So it's about, it's, as I said at the outset, it's about investing in the grid. It's making sure we're capable, that our ports, we're investing in our ports that they can have offshore renewable energy, that we are enabling our communities to be able to invest in renewable energy. And that's through community ownership, in farming, anaerobic digestion. This is all about job creation as well. Retrofitting, yes, we absolutely... Like there was 216,000 homes retrofitted since 2015, and 80,000 of those was done before the 2020 government, before the Greens got into government. Okay. We believe in this and we want to continue to invest. And one final point, Pat, to do all of this, and we all have this vision about reducing our emissions, we need to make sure we have the finances and the money to do it. And that is why Fine Gael and government have the track record of being able to manage the Climate Action Fund, the Rainy Day Fund, so that we can invest in our future and make sure we have the jobs as well in this renewable space.
Okay, thanks. Jennifer, the most patient woman in the room. Give me some red lines for the Social Democrats.
Well, Lord, where do I start after that? Okay, so for the Social Democrats, like we were talking about this, what would be our deal breakers? And I think the most important thing we could do is make sure that the next government actually puts in place a pathway. So really does the climate action plan, but does it properly so that it does amount to the 51%. What those different issues are, what elements within that, you know, obviously will be a negotiation, but I think we absolutely have to have a pathway written down and agreed to meet the 51%. In relation to the hard decisions, I think, you know, we're sort of sniping, or there's a lot of sniping at each other here. I think the key questions are for Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and not just about what hard decisions they will make in the future. What hard decisions did you make in the last government? Because as far as I can see, you didn't make any at all. So the Climate Act was put in. It was a cross-party agreement and consensus on that. And then really there wasn't a huge amount done. So when you think about it, data centres, we're talking about retrofitting and asking people to make changes to their homes, to how they drive, all this kind of stuff. It's all very much an individual thing. But all that work is completely being negated by the amount of energy the data centres are using. And there has been no controls on data centres put in place. There is no strategy, no holistic overall government strategy that deals with data centres. I'm not saying we don't need data centres, because we do, but do we need them using 30% of our electricity by 2030? Are we going to be able to maintain that? Are we going to have the renewable energies in place? And I don't think we have, where there's warning signals that that will not be the case.
So would you have a moratorium on data centres?
So our proposal, we actually put a motion forward. It was one of the first motions maybe 3-4 years ago in relation to data centres, and it was for a moratorium. Okay. But until
so is that a red line to go into government?
No, the red line is getting everything down on paper, having that pathway. Right, so you can't go in and say red line on this, this and this, because you'll never get into government. We want to be in government.
I think the Greens did some of that last time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they said their red line was actually getting the 51% written down, and they didn't achieve it. So, you know, you can say what your red line is. We want, that is our main focus, so, and we will deal, but there's other issues as well. So I suppose in relation to the data centre moratorium, it's not saying absolutely none forever. It's how many can Ireland afford from an environmental perspective? And how do we fit that into, how do we put conditions on them so they're part of that ecosystem where they're performing a function? Can they act as storage? Can they, be part of district heating? So it's having a strategic focus on it. So that's one element. But when we look at the agricultural community and what has happened there, all we've seen is Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil talking out of both sides of their mouths, not being honest with farmers about what kind of changes are going to have to happen, and essentially not preparing them. So farmers are absolutely brilliant at doing what government pays them to do and what government asks of them. And they have done it to the 100%. But what that has meant over the years is that we have a very, very intensive form of agriculture, which means that our waters are in desperate condition. We have emissions issues. You know, and it's actually not good for farmers either, because that intensification isn't providing a sustainable income for many of them. And rather than Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil saying, okay, we know this is a problem, we know business as usual, because if you're really interested in climate, you'd be clear that business as usual isn't going to be possible. Rather than preparing farmers and working with them and funding them to actually do the right thing, you're saying to them, it's fine, don't worry about the nitrates derogation, we'll fight for it. The nitrates derogation is based on science.
Okay.
It is based on science, and you're not going to be able to fight science.
Okay,
right?
listen, time is against us, and I want to go to the audience, but I want to get just a couple of yes-no answers from the panel. On that latter point about a moratorium on data centres, Darren, yes or no?
I think it's really important until we ensure that we have sufficient renewable on the grid, or else we're going to crash the energy system.
So yes, Pippa?
It's clear in our manifesto we will only support the development of data centres if they can demonstrate they come with their own 100% renewable energy and not draw on the grid, as Darren suggested.
Yes-ish, Hildegarde?
Data centres are really important for Ireland. But with that said, we also need to ensure that there is sufficient grid usage when data centres are up and running, and where they're located near renewable energy centres are important, and also around if they're near district heating centres and heat capture, all of that needs to be part of it. So it's not, there needs to be, I suppose, restrictions around it, but we absolutely need to have data centres in this country.
So that's no, but restrictions, Paul?
Yes, definitely. I mean, last year, the increase in demand from energy centres, data centres, exceeded the extra renewable energy that was put onto the grid. So we're getting further and further away to achieving 100% renewables. This is the attempting to walk down an upwards escalator. We need no more data centres until we're at 100% renewable. We're already well over 20%. We're more than 10 times the European average. This is big tech being put before people's right to electricity in this country and our climate obligations.
Okay, thanks. And Thomas?
No, we don't support a moratorium on data centres. We want to make sure that we protect our industrial capacity, protect our employment, and that includes making sure there's a lot more renewable energy there, and all of those technologies are used to ensure that we can actually provide the energy that's needed for data centres. So we're not proposing a moratorium.
Just before we go to the audience, one more round of yes or no's. The nitrates directive, it's by no means clear that it is possible to extend it, but if you were in government, would you seek to extend it, yes or no?
Seek to extend it, but not at the cost of water quality. If we can't meet the water quality standards,
so yes and no,
don't.
Okay. Pippa?
Look, we accept how important it is for quite a proportion of the agriculture sector in Ireland. This is all about water quality, but I've been on a couple of debates of late, and unfortunately, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin too, actually, and Fianna Fáil are pitching this as a political decision. It isn't a political decision. This is a decision. I met with the commissioners commission officials when they came here. They're looking at our water quality. That's the only thing that's going to retain the derogation for Irish farmers, not a political pressure from the Taoiseach.
Hildegarde.
So we've been very clear in Fine Gael, and we continue to be clear in our manifesto around the nitrates derogation. This is really important, and this is all about water quality, and that is why the Taoiseach, Simon Harris, said he will set up a cabinet committee on water quality, ensuring that we're helping farmers and we're helping in relation to reducing emissions. So we need to protect farmers. And I just want to come back on Jennifer. Farmers have done a lot. They're doing a lot in relation to reducing their emissions. And this is a really good example of talking down to them. What we need to be doing is helping them, which we're doing through the carbon tax, part of that funding, and CAP.
Okay, I'll come to you. Yeah, Paul?
No. Stop lying to farmers. Stop pretending that the science can be defeated by political
arguments. You insult farmers every time you open your mouth, Paul. You insult.
Hold on, Pippa. Hold on, let him speak.
The farmers have massively expanded dairy because they were incentivised and encouraged to do so by the government.
Okay.
If we were to just reduce the dairy herd back to the level we had 10 years ago, that will be 58% of our targeted reductions in agriculture. So we need a dairy herd reduction scheme to pay farmers to exit dairy, just like we've incentivised them, and we need to improve their lives.
Okay, Thomas. nitrates?
Look, there shouldn't be a conflict between farming and the environment. That's the first thing. I think some people try to create that politically. We'll continue to fight for the nitrates derogation, but ensuring also that we can work with farmers who, any of them I've met, are willing to work to ensure environmental protection and biodiversity protection and water quality as well.
So, look, I know farmers are willing to work. It's the government, it's Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil that aren't willing to work with farmers to make sure they're prepared to do this. You're giving, it's a disservice to farmers the way you're behaving with them. You're going to walk them off a cliff edge when it comes to the herd size, when it comes to nitrates derogation. We cannot continue with business as usual, and both of your parties are actually you're just being disingenuous with farmers, and farmers can see it as well. So Social Democrats have a €1.5 billion fund that we would set aside for farmers to assist them and to finance them, including a debt forgiveness fund as well, because we understand that previous governments have done them no favours at all, and actually they're going to need support to get out of the hole that you've dug for them, and the hole that you've dug for our environment, and make sure that actually that we have a sustainable farming sector, one where jobs can be provided and succession is guaranteed for farmers, but also that we have an environment that we're protecting.
Okay, we're going to go to the audience for some questions.
Thank you. Siobhan from Trócaire and Chair of Stop Climate Chaos. Just to look at international and global climate justice for a minute, I'm wondering, many countries across the developing world can't implement their own plans because they don't have the finance. And this is finance that we owe, that richer countries owe to poorer countries. And that's actually being negotiated at COP at the moment. And the EU not playing the most constructive role in an ambitious climate finance target. But my question for you in government is, would you support that Ireland pays its fair share of climate finance? And just to clarify, from calculations and what will come out of COP, this will be a floor of €2 billion per annum, and it should be public climate finance. And maybe another, if you could also add, if you would support taxes on fossil fuel companies that have caused so much damage to the climate as part of reaching this goal.
Okay, thanks. I think that's a meaty enough question and worth going. We might group some questions in a while, but I'll come to everyone, and can I encourage you to keep your answers brief. So, as I understand it, Oisin will correct me if I'm wrong, there's about 200 million currently goes in climate finance. That's a much more ambitious proposal for 2 billion. So what say you, panel? Darren.
Yeah, I think again, it's one of those pieces where the science demands that these are the responsibility in terms of the emissions. It needs to be factored in.
So you would pay up to 2 billion.
We've matched the government's commitment thus far. I mean, the government aren't delivering on their own commitment. We would, but also I think this needs to be the direction of travel. There needs to be international commitment to this level of funding. But in Ireland, it means we have to get that energy transition piece, the opportunity of a new economy in Ireland. But yeah, that's the scale of the ask, and that's it's an ask based on historical obligations.
Okay, Pippa.
Actually, we've committed in our manifesto to go to 500 million a year, which is more than double what we currently give. You might say that's nowhere near 2 billion, and it isn't, but knowing how hard it was to get to the 225 million a year, it's a reasonable increase, I think, to ask and to push for, and something that could quite possibly be delivered. I think a lot will depend on how obviously the COP29 negotiations go, and I hope they come to a favourable landing place.
Okay, Hildegarde.
Yeah.
There's two figures, I suppose. There's a 2 billion, and then there's the Greens are looking for, if you're backing government with them, would be 500 million.
Yeah, so we're committed, it's in our manifesto, to working towards that target, the UN target of 0.7% of gross national income for overseas aid. And we also want to continue to increase our funding in relation to international climate finance, that roadmap.
Working towards a figure, though.
Yeah, increasing it.
It might mean increasing it, but
this all comes
rarely means hitting it.
And this all comes back to ensuring that, and we're in a very good, I suppose, position at the moment financially, but we have to as well take into account, I suppose, good financial management of our economy and of our finances. And I will say again, Fine Gael has the track record there. If we continue going like we are, we can continue to progressively contribute to it. Is what I'm saying. But we have, in our manifesto, committed to that target of 0.7%.
But if things that are completely outside our control happen, then you may be dealing with an awful lot less corporation tax, in which case you will have to make the difficult choices that Paul so admires our advice on.
Yes, and that's government. That's government. But it's not saying that our ambition is not there. We have been very, even over recent years, in relation to our overseas aid, we have, and Fine Gael have led the way in this, particularly Minister Simon Coveney in Foreign Affairs, to continue to contribute, and it's really important. But we have to be realistic as well. I'm not going to name a figure here that we maybe cannot commit to, but we do want to increase it.
Okay, Paul?
Darren, Chris.
Yes, we agree. I think...
2 billion figure.
Yes. There's a historic responsibility on the global north. You know, often there's a lot of talk about developing countries and how much they're doing now, but you talk about historic emissions that have gotten the world to the place that we've gotten, and the massively disproportionate responsibility of the global north for that. So there needs to be funding for loss and damage, and that needs to be paid for by the big polluting corporations, who are the ones responsible, as opposed to ordinary people in this country. And I think it's important that that is not mixed up and we don't play with figures in terms of overseas development aid. Loss and damage is something separate and needs to be funded separately.
Okay. Thomas?
Look, I don't know if Sinn Féin gave that commitment off the stage, but I'm not going to give a financial commitment like that off the stage if you don't mind. But I do know something that, in terms of actions that we've done during the last government, under Micheál Martin, the government tried to get climate addressed at the UN Security Council as a sort of a topic at the Security Council. I took part in negotiations in New York as Europe Minister with the Chinese at that time. They abstained. The Russians vetoed it, actually, so it's not on the agenda of the Security Council. But I think that's how seriously we take this, apart from all of the other active engagement on climate issues at global level. Ireland was leading on that issue during our presidency of the Security Council. That's the leadership that we've given. It's the leadership that Micheál Martin was prepared to give as well, to try to get this onto the highest global stage. And we didn't succeed because of a Russian veto.
Okay.
It's something that we can certainly continue to work on and be really proactive in that space. And we know that we have an obligation to as well.
Okay, Jennifer.
So look, we would commit to doubling what we've already committed to, so 500.
500
yeah.
million.
But I do think that it is something that, you know, I suppose we could potentially be going into a period of economic uncertainty. So I'm not even sure any of these commitments, how real they are, because I think it's very difficult to give them in advance of any negotiations. But I do think we do certainly need to be recognising the impact that we've had as a first world country on the developing countries. And as well as that, I mean, we're going to see a lot more immigration as a result of the impacts of climate change on these different countries. And I think there is going to be certainly a benefit of Ireland investing in those countries to make sure that, you know, people can stay in their own homes, stay in their own countries, and that Ireland actually helps them adapt to whatever climate change is going to bring to them. And so I think that's where I'd like to see the focus being in financing. And I think we are going to have to give a whole lot more than we had ever previously committed to.
Okay, I think we have 2 questions over there, so we might take them both together.
Thank you. I'm Karen Chazowski, Coordinator of the Environmental Pillar. If elected to government, how will your party deliver on the EU nature restoration law in Ireland? And how will you plan to fund actions, for example, increasing staff and resources for the National Parks and Wildlife Service? And how will you ensure civil society engagement in the design of those plans? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And we'll take 2 questions together.
Yeah, thank you. Claire O'Connor from Friends of the Earth. A question on retrofitting specifically, and there's been huge funding going into retrofitting in the current term of this government, including to the Warmer Home Scheme. But there is a lot of people who are still falling through the cracks with regards to retrofitting, specifically tenants in the private rental sector. Now, we've done an analysis of the manifestos to date, and Labour and People Before Profit are the only 2 parties who've committed to introducing minimum BERs, which is a policy that was in Housing for All, but unfortunately has been falling down on the political agenda. There's supposed to be minimum BERs coming in next year, but as I said, only 2 parties have actually committed to implementing those. And that really has to happen. Tenants in the private rental sector, a third of them are living in enforced deprivation at the moment. So when we're talking about cost of living and housing as being really important issues for people, linking these in with climate, it really is the key. And I think it's a massively missed opportunity. The parties aren't focusing on the minimum BERs. So
Okay, thanks. So two distinct questions, I suppose, retrofitting in the nature restoration law. I'll start over here this time.
Okay, so in relation to the nature restoration law, we would absolutely commit to implementing it in full. I think it's really important. And I think what we need to start doing is combining nature restoration and climate. They're the same issue, you know, the solutions for one are the solutions for the other, and vice versa. We need to move away from, again, the sort of greenwashing when it comes to this. We have a number of national parks in this country that are national parks in name only. We need to make sure that we have highly protected areas within those national parks. Social Democrats have committed to doubling the size of those national parks, but it's also not just about the national parks, it's about how we live and how we use our land, and making sure that we have connectivity between all those different sites, that we're actually providing space for nature to thrive. I think it is going to be possible for us to do the majority of the heavy lifting. The state is the largest landowner in the country. And I think the first place we need to look, not only just from a sort of bang for buck, but also from a leadership perspective, is the state needs to look at the lands we have under Quilter control and under Byrne and control. And we need to make sure that the remits of both of those agencies, indeed all agencies, have biodiversity really embedded in it, so that they are actually, you know, they're not just commercial considerations, because I have sympathy for Quilter and Byrne at the moment. They are businesses. There is a legal responsibility on them to make commercial decisions. The government, and again, this is one of the other decisions that the government did not take. The way the government has set it up means that those companies couldn't put biodiversity at the heart of what they were doing. So, you know, I think that should have been an easy win that we should have seen coming from Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and we haven't seen it. And I think that is certainly something that we would do.
And retrofitting?
The retrofitting, yeah. Look, I think the BER is really, really important. I think there's when we're looking at homes of, say, people on low incomes or the renters, we really need to start giving them options, but we need to make sure that we're sort of baking in a lot of the solutions for them. So one of the things that, like the Warmer Home Scheme, doesn't provide solar. And that's something that the Social Democrats would do, is make sure that solar was available free of charge to all those low income homes. But no, but there is other elements as well. So it's whether, and one thing we do want to look at is whether HAP should be based on, you know, that you could use the HAP scheme in order to actually encourage landlords to put measures in place that their tenants could actually benefit from. You know, if a landlord said that they were going to provide HAP accommodation for a number of years, 5 or 10 year period, well then perhaps they could, you know, avail of the retrofitting schemes as part of that. So that's something that we would need to look at.
Thomas, the nature restoration.
Nature restoration law. I'm very proud that my party colleagues in the European Parliament worked hard on this, including Billy Kelleher, MEP, in terms of making sure that this is right for Ireland, and in terms of the ultimate negotiations that happened on bringing together this EU law. We're confident that every part of the obligation there can be implemented on state-owned lands, and we're very, very clear about that at the time, and very clear about that now. It can happen. There are other people that may want to do it voluntarily, but it's something, again, that can be very exciting, can be very interesting to people, and again, people buy into it when it's explained to them. But again, in the Dáil, from most of the opposition, there was absolute uproar about this, including some in government, I would say, too.
What's Dáil, yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean all the opposition. And I would say that the Social Democrats have, even on carbon tax, I think you've been pretty consistent. I will say that. Because I remember those votes, and I could see the few lights on your side, yes.
Stop flirting with her, come on.
Well, I put it up to them like they didn't come into government the last time, but I think they certainly have good, good hearts and good spirit on environmental issues, okay, as does Fianna Fáil. But there are practical. Well, I'm sorry, but we're the ones who've gone into government to put these targets in place, to provide the numbers, to vote these things through, which is the most difficult thing you can do, and which almost half the Dáil refuse to do. We are willing to do this. We're willing to take the hard decisions. We're enthusiastic about it. We know what this country needs. We always put the interests of this country first, and we will do that in the case of climate change as well.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly on that. You see, fair enough, getting the votes through, that's like a difficult thing. But surely actually doing it is like more difficult, or certainly it seems to be more difficult. So it's all very well, and like it's very good, we have a binding climate law, but like if we don't achieve the targets that are set out in them, what really was it worth for us? And then the time has has passed. Just concretely on the questions, nature restoration law. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff Jennifer said, I do think the point about changing the mandates of all these state agencies, I'd also add Board BIA, for example. At some stage we asked the Minister for Agriculture whether they would, or it was the department in the committee, whether they would promote vegetarian diets. And they were like, no, sure, we wouldn't have any role in that. But state money goes into promoting meat-eating diets and dairy consumption and so on. So it is a question of those two. Also goes back to the question of farming. We have proposal for 1.25 billion for a dairy herd reduction scheme and another billion for farming for biodiversity payment. Secondly, on the private rental sector, we had a bill which Claire helped to launch a couple of months ago to do precisely this, to say that all private rented accommodation, the state has to reach B2 by 2030 and a series of steps to get there. At the moment, you have this split incentive whereby the landlord has no incentive to do it because they're not paying the bills, and the tenant, one, doesn't have the money to do it, and two, if they did it, could be evicted in a year's time and then doesn't get the benefit from it. So we need to make it a legal requirement. In our legislation, we also say explicitly it cannot be a grounds for a so-called renoviction to ensure that people aren't evicted as a consequence.
Okay, thanks. Hildegarde.
Thanks for that. In relation to the retrofitting, this is something we want to ramp up as well. And I suppose as part of a programme for government, if we were to get into that space, I think this is going to be really important. I think you raise a really important issue around, I suppose, private rented or HAP, or it was raised in this context. And that's where we would like to go to. But the reality of it as well is what we don't want is the unintended consequence of the burden of landlords, and they pull out of the rental market. And I know we're increasing, like housing is our top priority here as well, and increasing the supply. Landlords are playing their role, helping the state to house people, so we have to get that balance right. And I understand the ESRI, I think, is doing a piece of work in relation to that on the costs of landlords, and maybe that's something we can look at as well around programme for government. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Pippa.
In relation to nature restoration law, it's great that it's passed, and I would like to acknowledge the work of my colleague Malcolm Noonan and Eamon Ryan for actually helping shift the views of many of the Irish MEPs who ended up supporting it. Unfortunately, Sinn Féin didn't support it. So again, it's the conflict there in Sinn Féin as to where they actually stand on climate action, on nature restoration. We've a nature restoration plan now to put in place over the next couple of years. One thing I would point to is, and this is what frustrates me a little bit about Paul's attitude towards the farming sector, 2/3 of the land mass of Ireland is agricultural, and while national parks are great and everything, it's a tiny proportion of the land. And if we really want to restore nature, we have to work with farmers to do that. The nature restoration law now enables us as potential politicians of the future to go to Europe and say, you've passed the law, we've all agreed it, now fund it. Now sort out the funding to put into that fund to help farmers across the country, to help countries like Ireland meet our meet our nature restoration targets. Okay. That's one big thing, because the farming lobby and the farmers and the farming lobby, they will do this, they will respond to funding, but there won't be enough in the Common Agricultural Policy budget, which has been made smaller and smaller and smaller. So if we really want to deliver on nature restoration in Ireland, we need the funding, we need it from Europe. Okay. Obviously, we're net contributors, we'll have to fund that as well, but that's where we have to focus, from my perspective, is certainly on that land mass.
Okay, Darren.
On the nature restoration law, just to be clear in relation to it, you want to come back on it?
No, she doesn't.
No, we'll keep going, yeah. Nature restoration law, Sinn Féin had supported it when we had secured commitments in relation to that it would be voluntary and that there was a strong language in terms of commitment to funding. When that text was removed, our position changed and we didn't support it. That's not to say that we don't support nature restoration, the exact opposite. We're ambitious in relation to it, but it needs to be done with bringing people with us. What we've done is literally put our money where our mouth is in relation to that, and allocated significant fundings in our last two alternative budgets and in our manifesto this year to support landowners in that transition and to farm for nature and everything else that goes with that. We've a €300 million dedicated nature restoration fund. We have a €10 million Kish to Baha fund for urban green spaces and woodlands, and a €1 billion fund from the Apple tax for working class communities. And I've secured a commitment from the party that would be available to communities that want to develop in nature projects.
On the same day that Sinn Féin voted against the nature restoration law, an MEP candidate from Sinn Féin was praising it as great news.
And that MEP candidate is now an MEP, and she will be working very hard to ensure that there is commitments at a European level to deliver nature.
I want to go back to the audience. Just come back in your last answers, because we're really up against time. We're going to have 2 quick questions and then even quicker answers.
Hi, Adrian O'Doherty from DCU. My question is on LNG, and particularly I'd like to hear from Sinn Féin, Gael and Fianna Fáil on this, because their manifestos are virtually silent on LNG. So there's a active planning application for a huge fracked gas LNG terminal in Kerry, Shannon LNG. I want to know now, all of these parties, you supported the ban on fracking, you're against frack gas imports, you've said. Will you stop the Shannon LNG terminal going through? And if so, how are you going to stop it?
Okay, clear question. We'll come to that. And last one. There's one here and one. Oh, Jesus, right. Come on.
My name is Sorley McCaughey. I'm representing the Fair Seas Coalition. And my question is on marine conservation. Marine conservation has a really important role in keeping the world cool. And a big part of that is legislation to ensure that we have marine protected areas around Ireland. It was supposed to happen in the last Oireachtas, but inexplicably it didn't happen. And I've had a look at the manifestos. Fianna Fáil have nothing on enacting the bill. Fine Gael have virtually nothing on marine conservation at all. But PPP, Socialist Party, have nothing on enacting the MPA legislation. Labour, Sockdown, Greens and Sinn Féin all have good, strong commitments on it. So to those parties who have made those strong commitments, can you, given the urgency of the situation, can you commit to introducing that legislation within the first 100 days of a new Dáil, should you be in government? And to the Green Party and to Fianna Fáil, what reason should I take away from today to think that you will be able to enact this legislation that you so pitifully failed to deliver last time?
Okay, that's great. And last question down there.
One last question. And so David Rossiter from the Coalition 2030. So this next term of the government will finish right as the Sustainable Development Goals will reach their targets at 2030. So we really need to see this next government really prioritise the achievement of those goals. So my question is, if in government, will you move the SDG unit, which is currently sitting in the Department of Environment and Climate, into the Taoiseach's office, and will you increase resources for that unit?
Okay, so brief answers, all if you can, because we're right up against time. There's 3 questions, all of which will lend themselves to yes or no answers, but I'm not optimistic. We'll get them. LNG, Marine Conservation Bill and the Sustainable Development Goals. Darren.
So LNG, I don't think there is any basis for the need for LNG in Ireland. Particularly when you look at it from an environmental perspective. And I think every new energy infrastructure has to be considered in terms of the energy trilemma. And as we know, the environmental leg of that is, they're not 3 equal legs.
Okay, but I guess the question is, will you block it?
There's no basis for there should be no basis for LNG in Ireland.
Will you block it?
In my opinion. So in terms of the mechanism of how we block it, I don't think it wouldn't be consistent with a Sinn Féin programme for government, in my opinion.
Okay, and the Sustainable Development Goals and the Marine Conservation Bill?
Marine Conservation Bill, we've very frustrated that the government have been so slow in enacting it. We would make it a priority. I think it needs to come hand in hand with the development of our offshore. It's deeply regrettable that it hasn't happened to date. The SDGs we've heard often from the groups at the committee, they need to be embedded into everything that government do, and I think the Taoiseach's office is probably a better place for them.
You can stick it in beside the United Ireland unit in the Department.
And the Energy Security and Independence unit.
Very good, Pippa.
No to LNG. We don't need it, and if we can stop it, we will, and we're not supportive of it. marine protected areas, yes, very frustrating. We haven't, but the legislation is drafted. It's ready to go. So we'd be making that actually a 100-day commitment. Why not to have that enacted in any programme for government negotiations? And on the SDGs, I think there needs to be an overarching review of the SDGs. They're really not delivering in so many ways. So I'd much rather a review happens before we start moving it into another government department. But that's a bigger UN level. But I think we could possibly review them ourselves, at a domestic level.
Hildegarde.
Thanks. So we spend €10 billion every year on importing fossil fuels. That's completely unsustainable. From a Fine Gael point of view, we want to invest in offshore renewables. That's the space we're in. But we also have to, I suppose the reality of the situation, we have to make sure the lights are kept on and that we have this reliable, sustainable energy source. So while we absolutely prioritise renewable energy, it wouldn't be, I think, prudent at this point to rule anything out. But the space we want to be in is renewables. The marine bill, I'm chief whip, or was chief whip. So every 2 weeks we will get an update on legislation, and it is moving. It's extremely complex to get through, but it is a priority. And if we are serious, and we are around offshore renewables and investment in our ports and offshore, it does need to be part of that. So I would imagine in a programme for government we would be. That would be a priority, but certainly there was a lot of progress on it. And sorry, the SDGs, I think it's a very good point you make. Structures of government or cabinet or Taoiseach's department, that would be something that would need to be discussed.
Okay.
I think after the election. Thanks.
Paul?
Yeah, SDGs, yes, into the Department of Taoiseach. MPAs, that's a bad oversight on our behalf. That isn't because it's not our policy, because we have been calling for it in the Dáil, and I will make sure that before the election campaign is over, we have another public commitment in writing in relation to that. And then finally on the LNGs, we must not have any LNG under any basis, temporary energy security, blah, blah, blah. The idea of investing in fossil fuel infrastructure at this moment makes no sense, particularly investing in fossil fuel infrastructure, which is going to be having fuel that is more dirty than coal. It makes no sense whatsoever. And I do think you have to raise a question mark. I don't mean to be rude or argumentative or whatever, but about the Green Party saying, oh no, yeah, we're against LNG, when they signed off on saying that LNG could be strategic infrastructure in the planning bill.
And we were totally against commercial LNG, always have been, totally against that.
Okay.
People can judge for themselves.
Tommy?
On marine protection areas, something that's very important to me, and I know that under Darren O'Brien that bill was being progressed in terms of the drafting. It's a really complex piece of legislation. We brought in the Marine Area Regulatory Authority, MARA, a number of years ago. That was an absolutely mammoth piece of work, within that section of the department, to make sure that our seas were ready for the work that was ahead in terms of energy production, but also protecting our environment. And that work continues, and that work has been continuing under Mr. Darren O'Brien. On LNG, I think we've always said that gas is going to be a transition fuel. I've been really, really clear. We want to move towards renewable energy. We want to accelerate that, and we've done really, really well on that. But there are lots of other European countries there who have significant imports of liquefied natural gas over the last number of years, and it has helped to keep electricity prices down. And they have the same environmental targets as us, set at a European level. They want to move to renewable as well. But we need to make sure that we're protecting this country in the short term. As Pippa said, if the lights go out, this is something that we need to watch for. And we need to have practical solutions, and I think Fianna Fáil is determined to practical solutions. So we need to move away from gas, but it may be needed in the meantime.
Okay, thanks. And Jennifer?
Okay, in relation to the SDGs, I'm not 100% sure whether, the Taoiseach's office will be, but certainly we will commit to increasing the resourcing. We want to look at the Department of Environment. We want to bring the Minister for Heritage across into that, so that will be something, so we'd have to look at it in that context. In relation to the LNG, we don't want to see the Shannon development, and we would do everything we could to stop it. I don't know whether it will be possible to stop it, but certainly we would try. And the marine protected areas, as a fisheries scientist, this is absolutely vital. And we would fight for it in a programme for government. We need ecologically coherent marine protected areas, but not just putting it again down on paper. We need to make sure that there's actual changes to what happens within those parks, so that there's regulations and conditions put on to the activities, and that's absolutely key.
Okay, thank you very much. We're right up against time, so I'll leave Diarmuid Torney to say the thank yous. But on my own behalf, thank you very much to the candidates who took time out from what are busy schedules today. Our democratic system requires people to stand for election, to have the bravery, the sense of public spiritedness and selflessness to stand for election. So I would just like to pay tribute to them, and I'll hand you over to Diarmuid.
Great. Thank you very much. So just to reiterate what Pat just said, thank you very much to all of the candidates and to Ivana Bacik, who had to leave earlier, for taking the time out of what is undoubtedly a very busy few weeks for you all. We appreciate you taking the time to join us here and to engage in the lively but respectful discussion that you did. Thanks very much also to our moderator, Pat Lee. It is also a very busy time for you, Pat, so thanks for agreeing to moderate the discussion and for doing such a fine job. Thanks to my colleagues in Friends of the Earth and Stop Climate Chaos. It was an honour and a privilege for us in the DCU Centre for Climate and Society to co-host this important discussion with Friends of the Earth and Stop Climate Chaos. Thanks in particular to Oisín Coughlin and Sarah Tunney from Friends of the Earth, to my own colleague Stephanie MacDonald, our Centre Coordinator, to Hugh Shields and colleagues here in the Royal Irish Academy, and finally to all of you, our audience here in person. There was also a significant audience watching online on YouTube. The recording will also be available to watch back. And so a final message to all of you is to use your vote wisely. Hopefully the discussion here this morning was useful to you all in helping to inform your choices. So thank you very much for coming.